Conservatives, libertarians, and alt-right activists frequently encounter race realism deniers online or in social settings. Race realism deniers, RRDs, seem to be everywhere, even when you're just getting a cup of coffee. These leftists will inevitably break out the line, quote, "Race is not real, race is a social construct," end quote. It's a silly cliche they picked up at junior college from their Marxist professors in freshman biology class. But how should someone on the right, interested in evolutionary science, best respond to that argument? Step right up. We've got the magical answers you've been waiting for. The top 5 research papers confirming race is real. Number 5. Early anthropologists were acutely aware modern humans could be classified based on phenotypes. BiologyOnline.com. Phenotype refers to the observable characteristics of an organism as a consequence of genetic traits and environmental influences. Continuing, the organism phenotype includes its morphological, biochemical, physiological, and behavioral properties. A groundbreaking paper was released in 2004, Genetic Variation, Classification, and Race. The two authors were top geneticists in their field, Lynn Jourdain and Stephen Wooding. Lynn Jourdain is a visiting professor of human genetics at the University of Utah. Wooding, PhD, is an associate professor of anthropology at the University of California, Merced. Key finding: clustering of individuals is correlated with geographic origin or ancestry. These clusters are also correlated with some traditional concepts of race. Quick definition: a nucleotide is a molecule that forms the basic building block of DNA and RNA, consisting of a nitrogenous base, a sugar, and a phosphate group. The researchers found that genetic variation between human populations, FST, is relatively small compared to the variation between humans and our closest relatives, the chimpanzees. According to the study, humans and chimpanzees differ by approximately 1% in nucleotides. Among humans, the average nucleotide difference is about 0.1%, 1/10%. Continuing, within this 0.1% variation, differences among populations range from 0.01% to 0.015%. They continue, 10 to 15% of the variation is found between continental groups such as Europeans, Asians, and Africans. Continuing, variation tends to be geographically structured such that most individuals from the same geographic region will be more similar to one another than to individuals from a distant region. Finally, broad population categories, Euros, Africans, Asiatics, can be discerned genetically when enough polymorphisms are analyzed, so these categories are not devoid of biological meaning. Key point: the largest genetic distance is seen between African and non-African populations. So, leftist race deniers are correct when they break out the line, quote, "There's more genetic diversity within populations than between them," end quote. However, the RRDs neglect the second half of the equation. There remains significant variation between populations, particularly between Eurasians and Africans. That is a major weakness in their argument. one that right-wing activists should exploit. A final note on this study. They only measured a very small amount of Afro-Pygmies and other isolated hunter-gatherers in Africa. They did not measure any Melanesians, including Papuans, Filipino, Negritos, or Australian Aborigines. Number 4. The evolutionary science world changed dramatically in 2010 when Svante Pääbo announced that they had discovered Neanderthal DNA in the Eurasian genome. It was 1997, Düsseldorf, Deutschland. Pääbo was just settling into bed when the phone rang. One of his lab assistants shouted, "We got the DNA, and it's not human." You can read the Svante Pääbo audiobook right here at YouTube. It's open access. Paper, a draft sequence of the Neanderthal genome. Neanderthals, the closest evolutionary relatives of present-day humans, lived in large parts of Europe and Western Asia before disappearing 30,000 years ago. Continuing, we present a draft sequence of the Neanderthal genome composed of more than 4 billion nucleotides from 3 individuals. Continuing, we show that Neanderthals shared more genetic variants with present-day humans in Eurasia than with present-day humans in sub-Saharan Africa. Continuing, this suggests that gene flow from Neanderthals into the ancestors of non-Africans occurred before the divergence of Eurasian groups from each other. Years after Pääbo's momentous discovery, we learned that Africans experienced a separate introgression event with a distinct archaic hominid species around 45,000 years ago. More to come on African introgression later in this video. Number 3. In the same year that Pääbo announced the Neanderthal DNA admixture, Johannes Krauss, his lab assistant, made another monumental discovery. Krauss had been working alone late at night at the lab in Leipzig. He grabbed a plastic bag with a tiny finger bone inside. The fossil was discovered by archaeology students at the Russian Academy of Sciences, Novosibirsk, under the directorship of Derevyanko and Shunkov. Очень приятно, как дела? Я понимаю, только немного по-русски. Вы понимаете? Спасибо большое. Krauss alerted Pääbo, who then contacted the Russians and informed them that the finger bone was a previously unknown species, not Homo sapien nor Neanderthal. Derevyanko and Shunkov invited Pääbo and David Wright to Russia for a summit on how to best announce the discovery to the press. Over rounds of vodka, as Reich would later describe it, they decided on the name Denisovans after the cave where it was found. Здравствуйте, David. Пейте больше водки. Спасибо. From the paper, using DNA extracted from a finger bone found in Denisovan cave in southern Siberia, we have sequenced the genome of an archaic hominid. Continuing, we designate this hominid population Denisovans and suggest that it may have been widespread in Asia during the late Pleistocene epoch. The authors further note the data suggests that Denisovans contributed 4 to 6% of its genetic material to the genomes of present-day Melanesians. In 2018, we learned of a hybrid, Denny, from the DNA of fragments of 5 femur bones found at the cave. The child had a Denisovan father and a Neanderthal mother. In 2021, we learned that one tribe in an isolated region of the Philippines, the Atamagbupan, had as much as 7.8% Denisovan DNA. Of special note for activists on the right, Denisovan DNA is rare in Europeans and non-existent in Africans. This indicates separate evolutionary tracks for Europeans, Africans, Asians, and Melanesians. Number 2. Katerina. Iasus, tikanetekaria, eparistopoli, miholiho elinika. Katerina Harvati is Greece's most famed paleoanthropologist. She specializes in craniology and 3D geometric morphometrics. She is the director of the Evolutionary Science Department at the University of Tübingen in Germany. She worked closely with her friend Chris Stringer on the Iwo Elaru skulls from Cameroon in the early 2010s. Epidema cave fossils. In 2019, Harvati, Stringer, and Rainer Grun et al. Released their monumental paper. The paper crushed the long-standing and dominant out-of-Africa paradigm. From the abstract, 2 fossilized human crania from Epidema Cave, southern Greece, were discovered in the late 1970s, but have remained enigmatic owing to their taphonomic distortion and lack of archaeological context. Harvati and her team conducted the morphometrics. The result, Epidema 1, was identified as Homo sapiens, not a Neanderthal. At Grun's irradiation lab in Australia, they made another shocking discovery. Paper. Epidema 2 dates to more than 170,000 years ago and has Neanderthal-like morphological patterns. Continuing, Epidema 1 dates to more than 210,000 years ago and presents a mixture of modern human and primitive features. Modern humans in Greece on the European continent 210,000 years ago? Quote, that's 5 times older than any other evidence of modern humans in Europe, end quote. Chris Stringer told the BBC. Liberal anthropologists have stated for decades that modern humans migrated out of Africa no earlier than 45,000 years ago. Number 1. Sankararaman and Derevyanko. In 2019-20, 2 nerdy genetic researchers at UCLA dropped a bombshell paper that obliterates the race is a social construct narrative. The paper was published at the distinguished journal Science, the peer-reviewed academic journal of the American Association for the Advancement of Science since 1880. Professor Sriram Sankararaman and PhD candidate Arun Derevyanko identified up to 19% archaic hominid DNA admixture in extant modern Africans. Paper highlights. Britannica. Computational genomics is a branch of biology involving the application of computers and computer science to the understanding and modeling using computational methods for simulation of biological systems. From the abstract, our analysis indicates that these populations derive 2 to 19% of their genetic ancestry from an archaic population that diverged before the split of Neanderthals and modern humans. Continuing, we determined the split time to be 625,000 years before present. the admixture time to be 43,000 years ago, and the admixture fraction to be 0.11%. Continuing, one interpretation of our recent time of introgression is that archaic forms persisted in Africa until fairly recently. The archaic population could have introgressed earlier into a modern human population. Of course, leftist activists and liberal college students will bristle at any suggestion that Africans have admixture with primitive hominid species. No doubt they will cry, "You're a racist!" However, nobody in evolutionary biology disputes the veracity of the Shunkov and Derevyanko paper. Both geneticists have impeccable credentials and reputations. Of course, given their ethnic backgrounds, they could easily escape any charge of racism. Finally, the Derevyanko-Shunkov paper came with the illustrious UCLA seal of approval. There was another geneticist who preceded the UCLA duo. Dr. Michael Hammer of Arizona State University had detected signals of archaic hominin DNA admixture in Africans in 2005. Dr. Hammer's paper received little attention, in some circles identifying archaic hominin DNA admixture in the early to mid-2000s was dismissed as nothing but science fiction. Oddly enough, there was some truth to that charge. Svante Pääbo had spent a decade trying to extract ancient DNA from Egyptian mummies, but suffered one spectacular failure after another. By the 2010s, the science of archaic DNA admixture had become legitimized by the work of Pääbo and his Max Planck Institute, along with numerous other top geneticists. Most recently, another paper published by two Nigerian MDs confirmed Derevyanko and Shunkov findings. Hujambo, uhaligani, nafarahi sana kukona, tafadali, kwehere. Professors Whancom and Adeyemo are now affiliated with Johns Hopkins University in Maryland. They published a paper in 2023 leveraging our common African origins. The paper complements the findings of Derevyanko and Shunkov. It also included an astonishing chart showing archaic hominin DNA admixture in Africans after divergence with Eurasians. Quote, that Africans carry more ancestral alleles has been well demonstrated by the rooting of phylogenetic trees in Africa for both autosomes and uniparental DNAs by using the outgroup rooting method, end quote. Geneticist UC Davis, Dr. Shi Huang, 2020. A divergence and separate introgression event with one or more archaic hominins would definitively establish separate species status for Africans according to Linnaean taxonomical principles. Of course, given Whancom and Adeyemo's Nigerian background, they are immune from being labeled racist. All three papers should be cited when the Kumbaya We Are the World crowd argues that no modern human subspecies exist. When the inevitable charge of racism is lobbed, simply mention Whancom and Adeyemo. Derevyanko, Shunkov, UCLA. Michael Hammer, Arizona State University. Whancom, Adeyemo, Johns Hopkins University. Fortunately, more conservative and libertarian geneticists are coming out of the closet and speaking the truth. Quote, Alt-right proponents have stated correctly that Europeans and Asians have inherited 1 to 4% of their DNA from Neanderthals, which those of African descent do not have. End quote. Continuing, quote, they are similarly correct that Neanderthals had larger skulls than humans. Alt-right is no longer an easily dismissed fringe group. Their arguments have some factual basis. End quote. Vivian Chow, PhD, Forensics, Harvard Review, 2017. We hope this video has inspired you to take a more active role in promoting biological race realism. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.